Hi everyone, welcome to episode 21 of Engaging the Eagle, exploring US foreign policy in Southeast Asia. We're a podcast produced by the US program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS, based in Singapore. I'm Kevin, an Associate Research Fellow at USP.
Hi, this is Adrian, Research Fellow and Coordinator of the US program.
And we'll be your hosts for this episode on US-China ties and the change of international order under Trump 2.0. Donald Trump's electoral victory in November 2024 was not only a watershed moment in American domestic politics, but also signaled a fundamental shift in the post-Cold War international order. Given that Trump's administration and inner circle are both populated with China hawks, there are concerns about how he will conduct his relations with Chinese leaders. Yet there is also a structural explanation for the deterioration of US-China relations in recent years as well, with a distinct possibility that these conditions could lead the US and China towards confrontation and conflict. Joining us to discuss these issues is Professor Da Wei, Director of the Center for International Security and Strategy and Professor in the Department of International Relations at Tsinghua University. Professor, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's my great pleasure.
Professor, if I could, I think what I'd like to start off with is a topic based on a seminar that you gave last week here at RSIS. What, in your view, does Trump's electoral victory mean for the post-Cold War international order? And could a Harris victory have prevented these developments, or were they always expected to happen?
Yeah, this is something I have thought a lot in recent days, particularly after the victory of now the President Donald Trump for the second term. I mean, I think all of us maybe, be more or less be surprised a little bit by the fact that not only President Trump won the election, this is maybe not a big surprise for many people. He won not only the electoral vote, but he won the popular votes.
Yeah.
He won all the 7 swing states. And the Republican Party won the 2 chambers of the legislative branch of the United States. First, I think it's surprising for many people. Secondly, it sent out a signal from the American voter that this is a very, very clear signal that the American voters, at least the majority voters, want to choose the path that President Trump elaborated on his campaign trail or during his first term of presidency. Basically, it's America First approach. So President Trump, he was a very controversial president in the first term, but the American people still choose him. So for me, this victory have very important implication on world order. After the end of the Cold War, I call the order I call it post-Cold War international order. So in Western countries, some people say liberal international order. Some people say rules-based order. So, but I think no matter how we call it, I think we more or less refer to the same thing. So I think now this victory of President Trump implies 2 things. This is the end of the globalization, and this is the end of the liberal international order. Yeah, I know these 2 assertions maybe sounds provocative or too simple, but I intentionally put it in my presentation last week and here today. I think the economic globalization that we have been so familiar with, many countries and many individuals have benefited from that since the end of the Cold War, since early 1990s. Sometimes we say hyperglobalization. I think this period has ended. Now, some people say we are in a kind of slow globalization. Sometimes people say it's a weak globalization. Of course, I know the reality that goods, people, and other things, technology still globalize. It's true, it's still there. But the period that politically, I mean, very important, the hyperglobalization period has ended. So we probably have to adapt to a new nationalist economic order or economic relations among all the countries. So second implication is the end of the liberal international order. So this order was led by the United States as a hegemon and providing public goods, sometimes with military means, sometimes with using its economic advantage, try to support multilateral institution and also try to push for the Western democracy, human rights, values. I think this period has also ended. The United States is stepping backward to its national border. And also, I think many things, many policies that the U.S. is pursuing today, no matter it's Biden administration or Trump administration, I think are inconsistent with the values and the norms and the institutions they advocate for a very long time. Actually, I think to some extent, the U.S. is undermining the institutions and the values it had advocated for a very long time. I think these are the two changes that I observe from the victory of President Trump. So the end of the globalization or hyper-globalization and the end of liberal international order.
In fact, it brings to mind something that Senator Marco Rubio, in fact now Secretary of State Marco Rubio, now that he's been confirmed, he said during his confirmation hearing that the post-war global order is not just obsolete, it's now a weapon that's being used against the US. So now we have a situation where an American government in Washington is hostile towards the very order that it created. What do you make of this, and what opportunities do you think China sees in this kind of situation?
To some extent, I agree with now Secretary of State Rubio's statements that the post-international order at least is ended. But I don't think, I don't agree with him on his accusation that some countries, maybe I think he referred to China or maybe some other countries, weaponize the old order to put the U.S. in a disadvantaged position. If you ask a Chinese listener, Chinese experts, official, they may say the U.S. is weaponized the order, try to press China. People from different countries have different understanding of that. I think the fact is this order is ended, but I don't think it's an outcome of any country. I don't think it's China. I don't think it's the U.S. or other country. Any country want to weaponize this old existing order to use this order to against some other countries. I don't think so. I think, of course, the reason why this order has ended, I think, is very complicated, but put it in a very short way, I think the problem is in the process of globalization, benefit of that cannot be distributed evenly, particularly in the developed world. I think this is the biggest challenge. Of course, why that happened, you can say the Americans may blame China. China may say the U.S. should deal with your domestic issues maybe better to improve your domestic governance. So different people, again, have different understanding. But I don't think any country, at least, I don't think it's China or the U.S. want to weaponize, want to destroy this order, because both China and the United States have been benefited a lot. I think these two countries probably are the two countries that benefited the most in past 30 years from that existing order. So there's no reason, no incentive for either country to weaponize, to try to overturn the order that they benefit from. I think that's not for me, it does not make sense. From China's perspective, this is not in China's interest. I mean, the end of the order. Though I said I believe that it's ended, but I don't think it's in China's interest. China does not want this order be changed because China, of course, we want a stable, peaceful, interconnected external environment for China's economy to develop further. Why should we want that? Of course, now situation changed. All countries, including China, need to adapt to this new reality. In the new reality, probably there will be new opportunity. There will be, of course, new challenges. No matter you like it or not, you have to face the reality. But I don't think it's naturally or, it's, by nature in China's advantage. I don't think so. So probably it's not good for almost all the countries. In my personal view, it's a bad news for everyone. But this is a big trend. And that actually, back to your earlier question, you asked that if Kamala Harris won the election, can she or a Democratic administration reverse this? I don't think so, actually, because this is a big trend. And no administration in the U.S. can just simply reverse it. I think different administration, different president are just symptom of the problem. They are not the problem itself. so long as the problems in each of our respective countries or societies, I think the symptom will be there. So of course, Democrats have different character. They, for example, on foreign policy, they are quite different from the Republican side. I think they more or less support the multilateral institution, and they emphasize the importance of the alliance system. So on the security and the foreign policy side, they are very different from the Republican. But on the economic side, on the technology policy part, I think they are very similar.
Yeah, now there's more of a convergence in that.
Yeah. So let's say if Kamala Harris won the election, I may still say it's the end of globalization, but probably I will be more hesitant to say this is the end of the liberal international order.
I see.
Yeah, but now since the Republican won, so I think that these two ends happened together.
I see. Thank you.
Prof. Dart, yesterday when we had Trump's inauguration in Washington, D.C., right, across the Atlantic, we had the World Economic Forum in Davos. So it was, as you pointed out, almost two different worlds colliding. We had one, a very different vision from Trump and his talk of, right, a new golden age for America. And in Davos, right, there is still almost like the old globalized order still trying to cling on to its vision for a very different world.
Yeah, I think you are very much correct. Davos is always, actually from 1990s, is a symbol of the globalization, right? I still remember at the end of 1990s, there are a lot of anti-globalization activists protested in Davos. So at that time, if we look from the outer space, if we look at the Earth, I will say the globalization represented in Davos has been there for 30 years, but the new trend is the nationalism. And this trend of nationalism, I think, has eroded the trend of globalization in past 30 years, step by step, gradually. But now I think the nationalism has become kind of mainstream in many countries. So if we look at all the major countries, let's say the United States, China, let's say India, Russia, more or less, they are pursuing their own nationalist economic policy. And we will see more higher tariff will become a new normal. We may see more non-tariff barrier in international trade. We see more decoupling in technological side. We will see more industrial policy in all the countries. All those countries are pursuing some nationalist goal, like make America great again. In China, we are pursuing the national rejuvenation. So actually make China great again. I think in Russia, Putin wants to make Russia great again, though through a very bad approach. And India wants to make India great again. So I think we are all, pursuing this nationalist agenda. I'm not saying those agenda are correct or wrong. It's hard to say. All the countries have their own rights to pursue their own goals. But I think Davos, the World Economic Forum, is in Europe, in Switzerland. So I think Europe probably now is the place that the globalists still have the strongest, the biggest say, the strongest voice. But I think Europe have its own challenges domestically. Several countries will have their election. Germany will have their election very soon. So Europe have its own challenge. For the sake of the diversity of the world, I hope that Europe can maintain this globalist view to keep this view alive in the world. I think that's quite critical for the whole world, but I am not so sure if that will be true, let's say 2 years later or 3 years later. Let's wait and see.
Yes, thank you, Professor. That was very insightful. Actually, mentioning this notion of nationalistic ambitions and Mr. Putin as well, one of the things that really came up in the past few weeks when it comes to Mr. Trump and his administration is that he's been talking about Greenland, he's been talking about Panama, he's been talking about sending the US military squads into Mexico. This speaks to a very different kind of worldview that clashes quite significantly with the order that the US created during the Cold War and after it. And in an interview on Fox News, Mike Waltz, his national security advisor to be, discussed Mr. Trump's comments and said that this is in the context of reintroducing America in the Western Hemisphere and Monroe Doctrine 2.0. So what are your views on this? And what do you think Chinese leaders feel about Trump's apparent fixation on these territories?
I think those are very controversial, at least very controversial remarks from a US president, US leader. Of course, generally speaking, I think all of us, including I myself, or my country, my government, I think advocate for territory integrity and also the sovereignty, preserve, respect the sovereignty.
Yeah.
I think this is the universal laws or values that all of us agree with. So with that in mind, I think that's the reason why President Trump's remark regarding Panama Canal or Greenland or even Canada are so controversial worldwide. But put that aside, put those principles aside, I will say what President Trump said and what, like you mentioned, Mr. Mike Waltz said, reflects a kind of nationalist view of U.S. foreign policy. Traditionally, the mainstream of the U.S. foreign policy has not been nationalism. U.S. is more or less, it views itself as an exceptional country. After the 19th century, after the U.S.-Spanish War, I think U.S. has become a kind of global country. Internationalism has become the basic perspective that we view the American foreign policy. So after the World War II, usually we say the U.S. has been a different hegemony comparing with the hegemon in the history. The U.S. has been an institutional hegemony. So it's not a hegemon that just using military means to conquer a land, conquer other country, set up colony, and then set up their hegemony. I think this is not the U.S. approach. That's true that U.S. rarely occupied other country, basically no colony, but U.S. has been a world leader, and U.S. achieved that goal through set up and safeguard a set of institution, value, norms. I think this is the way that we have been so accustomed to of the U.S. foreign policy. But what President Trump and Mr. Mike Waltz described, and actually that's also something in the inaugural speech of President Trump yesterday, I think for them, I mean, the foreign policy first started from the domestic issues. I think because the U.S. have the immigration problem, so then he talked about, like what you said, using military forces to handle those issues. So it's quite unconventional, I will say. And then from the national border, then go beyond to the immediate neighbors, like Mexico. He talked about rename the Mexico Gulf to American Gulf. So this is to the south of America. And he, of course, to the north, he talked about Canada and Greenland. And in the inaugural speech, he also talked about Panama Canal. So all these are, of course, on the West Hemisphere. President Trump also cited, he mentioned President William McKinley in late 19th century. So that's a very interesting analogy, I will say. President McKinley also raised a tariff. At that time, I think they had a kind of trade war with French. And he launched the war against the Spanish and actually seized like Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines, and later Cuba. So the worldview that expressed by President Trump and Mr. Mike Waltz is more or less the nationalist tradition in U.S. foreign policy. It's not a mainstream view again. If we look back to past 100 or 150 years in the United States, but there is this kind of trend in the overall spectrum of the U.S. foreign policy. So now they tends to pick that to boost that tradition of the U.S. foreign policy, looking first from the U.S. per se, then to the immediate neighbor, then to places far away from the U.S. So in the past, the U.S. more or less a hegemon, universal hegemon, right? Global hegemon. So it's like the U.S. watching the Earth from outer space. But now they're sitting in Washington, D.C. and look to the south, look to the north, and what is the problem at my border, what is the problem in my immediate neighbor in West Hemisphere, then what's the problem with other countries in the other hemisphere. This is a different worldview. This is a different approach. So it's an interesting development I think we should follow.
Yeah, definitely true. Well, now that we're talking about the changes in the American worldview, it's also useful to talk about China's proposal for a different kind of international order. President Xi Jinping, he's not only proposed the Global Security Initiative, there's also the Global Development Initiative, Global Civilizational Initiative, all of which propose, a different kind of order that will come out in the world. What do you think are the main kinds of differences between what we traditionally know as the international order and what President Xi is proposing?
To be honest, I think China is still at its early phase elaborating its worldview or its vision. Yes, you are correct that China had those three initiatives and also other policies or vision that provided. But those three are the most important thing. But I have to say there's still a long way to go for China to elaborate that clearly enough. Those three initiatives, I will say, are quite comprehensive, basically include many things. So sometimes it's too comprehensive. So if you want the vision be clearly understood, probably you need to have a very clear philosophy underline the concrete policy issues. Then based on those philosophy, you need to list out maybe a set of values and priorities. Then in order to achieve those values, in order to achieve those goals, you are willing to sacrifice. You are willing to pay the price to achieve that.
Yeah.
If with all this, you will say this is a clear strategy. People know that what do you want, what do you don't want, what do you like, what do you dislike, right? So I think currently it's not clear enough to me. But I can see some things like China obviously want to, let's put it in this way, to use international relation theory jargon. I think there are at least two levels. One level is the realist part. The other is the idealist part, or you can say liberal part. So at the realist part, China emphasized very much a set of realist principles, like the mutual respect to sovereignty and territory integrity. So China hopes the international relations can be built on those realist principles that all the sovereign countries are equal to each other. I think this is the realist level of the initiatives. At the same time, China wants to show a willingness or aspiration to go beyond the realist. Basically believe that if all the countries only pursue their own national interest, then we will have conflict. So we need to go beyond that. That's why China raised the concept of the shared, the community of the shared futures, right? 人类命运共同体. I think that concept shows an aspiration that Chinese leaders believe that we should go beyond the realist principle to pursue something above the narrowly defined national interest. So those are very good ideals, visions, I will say. But how to achieve it? And also, when some of the value conflict with each other, how can we solve the problem? Like, for example, everybody think territory is important, but what about we have territorial dispute? How to solve it? So maybe all countries have their own their own reason to claim that the disputed territory. Then how to solve it? So it's still not clear. But as I said earlier, a clearer strategy probably means that here I have a principle to deal with the dispute territory. And then I'm willing to sacrifice, pay the price. Because based on this principle, I need to do this. Based on principle A, I need to do B. Then I know if I do B, I will pay the price. Maybe a war, or maybe a cede of the territory to other countries. But so long as it's consistent with the principle A, I will do the action B and pay the price of C. I will say this is a clearer vision, but China so far has not been able to elaborate or to think it very clearly. So I hope gradually China can have a clearer picture, become a major or big country, important country internationally you need to be mature intellectually. So not only you are a big economy, you have strong, very powerful military, you need to make contribution to the belief of the international relations. China need to make that contribution. To be honest, I think the US made some contribution. For example, after the end of the World War I, at that time, President Woodrow Wilson raised the 14 points peace plan.
Yeah.
I think actually in those plans, I think he elaborated a set of principles. So those principles later became the content of the international order after the World War II.
Yeah.
So these are the principles or the blueprints that can be implemented. So I think China still has a very long way to go in that regard. But the three initiatives, I will say, are a good try.
Okay.
But we need to... So back to your earlier question, maybe it's too early to say what are the differences between our vision and American vision, because I think our vision is still developing, while the US vision is also changing.
Yeah.
I think it's too early to say. It's not true that many people in the West, I think, believe that China are advocating for an alternative order or vision. I don't think so. It's not because we don't want to. I think China is not able to so far, not able to provide that alternative order. So I don't agree with that accusation that China wants to use parallel system or vision to replace the existing one. I think we don't want to, but more importantly, I don't think we are able to do that.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that does raise an interesting question for me, because given that the Chinese proposal for a different world order is still developing, the American one is changing, what would it mean for countries here in Southeast Asia? Because on one hand, a lot of regional leaders, they feel that there's some opportunities in trying to engage Mr. Trump over in Washington, because his more transactional approach to foreign policy versus the more values-based approach of his predecessors might be easier to engage with, to reach a deal with. But at the same time, there might also be challenges because a lot of these countries flourished underneath the international order that we're saying is crumbling. What do you feel are the biggest challenges for the countries in Southeast Asia with regard to this current situation?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question for the regional country in the Southeast Asia. I think there are a series of questions that need to be answered. I'm not sure if I have the answer to those questions, but first and foremost, will a Republican president in the White House pay more attention to this region or less attention? It's a question mark. And of course, it also depends on China-US relations.
Yeah.
I think if we have a stable and less confrontational China-US relations, then probably the US will pay less attention to this region. I don't know if it's a good news or bad news for the regional country, because if we have a confrontational relationship, the US will pay more attention to this region, but probably, you force the regional country to, if not choosing the side, but forcing you to do something that regional country may not necessarily like to do, because that could harm the China, for example, Southeast Asian countries' relations. And also, of course, for some of the regional countries, for example, the Philippines is an island of the United States, and the Philippines have territorial and maritime dispute with China.
Yeah.
So how the Philippines and the US relations will evolve under Trump is something we need to follow. So the second thing, I think more importantly, is, as you said, many regional countries flourished under the existing order. For example, Singapore is a country I think benefited a lot from globalization, from free trade. This is a country really benefited from international trade and economic activities. But now the strong wind is against the globalization. And we may see, maybe the growth of international trade and economic activity will continue to grow, but maybe with a lower rate, lower speed, or maybe it will divert to different direction, different regions. So it's hard to say. So anyway, I think Singapore, I believe, and including some other regional country, will benefit more if it's a hyper-globalization period. But now that period has ended, I think that's a big challenge for many regional countries. Having said that, I don't think it's purely a 100% bad news, negative news for the regional countries. We have these headwinds globally. We can still find new opportunities. For example, many Southeastern countries actually benefit from the US-China economic tension.
That's right.
Yeah. So there could be new opportunities. But anyway, it's a new situation. Then you need to adapt to it, the new situation.
Yeah.
Trying to find the new opportunity and trying to avoid the potential damage to the country. But in this region, all the countries some are middle power, but some are relatively small country.
Yeah.
So it could be difficult to handle this issue, but I'm very confident to the Southeast Asian countries.
Okay.
These countries are so smart in past 3-4 decades. I totally believe that country here can handle the new situation very well.
Thank you. I hope so too. As we reach the end of the podcast episode, I think one of the interesting questions I want to ask, it's related to the inauguration that we just saw. I noticed that Mr. Trump has delayed the implementation of the 60% tariffs that he promised on China. And not only that, over the weekend, he also stepped in to, in his words, save TikTok from a potential ban. Well, thankfully he delayed it, but we'll see what happens with that situation in the future. But it's still early days, but in your view, do you think this kind of presents a window of opportunity to dial back US-China tensions, maybe have a bit more dialogue between the two powers?
Yes, I do think there is a window of opportunity for the two countries to talk to each other, for the two presidents to have more communications, to understand each other's intention and compare the notes. What is your goal? What is my goal? What is the part that I can make compromise? In short, there is a window of opportunity for reach some kind of deal. The goal is to, of course, achieving the respective goals may be important for the US and at the same time important for China, but at the same time try to stabilize the bilateral relations. I think there is a window of opportunity. Actually, I believe the two leaders, they already talked to each other twice after the election, before the inauguration. So this is very unusual, I will say, for the two leaders talk twice, via phone. And I think after inauguration, I think the first 3 months will be a window of opportunity for the two leaders to negotiate, to talk to each other. Actually, we touched upon this earlier. I think if the two leaders can understand each other and can reach some kind of deal to embody the spirit of cooperation, that could be only about some concrete issues, let's say tariff, or TikTok, or maybe fentanyl, or maybe some other issues. But through that kind of deal, you can see the spirit of the cooperation between the two countries. Then that will set the tone for the two countries. On the US side, Trump had a very diversified, I will say, team regarding their view to China. They have different views in the team. And in China, we also have different views towards the US. So if the two leaders can talk to each other and set a relatively positive tone domestically, so that will pave a way for stable bilateral relations. But of course, my goal is very humble. I'm not saying fundamentally change or improve the bilateral relations. It will be structurally a competitive and difficult relationship, but I hope it's a stable, competitive relationship. So I think if so, I feel that should be okay. I'm satisfied with that.
In that case, just a last question for you, Professor. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with regard to the change in the international order and US-China ties, things to look out for?
Yeah, I think because now I'm sitting in the RSIS office, this is the first time that I can spend about 20 days in Singapore.
Okay.
So, as a Chinese and also a Chinese scholar study China-US relations, this would be a difficult relationship in foreseeable future. So, of course, that gave challenges to Singapore and other ASEAN countries here, but it also provides opportunities. For instance, I think Singapore is a platform to communicate the two sides, I mean China and the United States. Singapore is a small but important country, can play a key role in US-China relations and also in international affairs. So I do hope this country and also my colleagues here at RSIS, at NTU, can play some crucial role helping the region and the world to maintain stability and to improve, for instance, China-US relations and also cross-strait relations. We didn't mention Taiwan today, but Singapore did play some role in the past.
2015.
Yes. So again, I think Singapore is at a very, it's a crossroad, right? Geographically and also politically, I will say at a crossroad. A small country, but can leverage big powers. So I wish the country and the people here good luck.
Thank you. I think we're going to need it. Yes, and we'll reserve some of those topics for future episodes.
Yes, sure, definitely. No problem.
But until then, thank you for your time, Professor. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If there are any questions or topics you'd like us to tackle in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us on social media or through email. Until next time, stay safe, and we'll see you again.